Welcome everyone to another episode of the Unquestioned podcast with DeBaere and Willem Himpe. And today is already our episode number 11. So this episode will go about why defaults are important and why we need a platform. So first of all, to give you some context, maybe Louis, you could give your definition of what are defaults in the software world or in general, actually.
Yes, defaults are settings, configurations, choices really that an app or a system makes for you. For example, the operating system on your device, like your iPhone, will pick a default browser. And that's the browser that gets opened when you tap on a link in Mail. So if you don't change anything, they pick a standard choice for you. That way you don't have to manually do setup. And they do this with a bunch of things, like your default music player is Apple Music, not Spotify, and we'll get on that later.
Yeah, well, I see it as well, that the companies that set really good user defaults, trying to reduce their user frustration and get the user as quickly as possible to use the service as optimally as possible, because often
that's right,
there's all kinds of possibilities of customizing and other stuff, but in today's world we have no time. We just, in a couple seconds, we want to use it, get up and running, and that's why the defaults are so important. And the companies that are winning, like Apple, but as well other companies, have the best defaults in the beginning of using their software. Maybe we could give some examples of default settings and in the world that people might know from in their own lives.
Sure. First one, in an app that you know and use, Instagram and TikTok, when you open those, they will start filming in portrait. And you might think, well, that's not ideal. If I want a good shot, a good video, I want it to be in landscape, right? But you have to keep in mind, defaults are always optimized for the most common use case. And they're always made for the average user that will use your app. And for a social app, people don't really care about the perfect movie standard frame. They want it to be easily shareable on their smartphone. But if you open a professional camera app, on the other hand, it will be optimized for landscape. So, and then let's go to operating systems. It's very important that you get those details right. And a browser can also be considered an operating system at this point, because we do so much in there.
Correct.
The default browser, like we mentioned, is super important. This was a conscious decision by Google. It's also, I believe, why their current CEO, Sundar Pichai, grew so fast. He was part of the YouTube team and then the Chrome team, and it became really pivotal for Google to have a strong foothold in the browser space, because they did not own an operating system.
It's kind of funny as
music,
well, but I'm sorry to interrupt you, but as well, most laptops are sold today with Microsoft as an operating system, and often they have Internet Explorer or Edge. And it's funny that today as well, people just use it to install Chrome. So they had the operating systems where there were defaults in that software, but then went to the browser. Then they finally couldn't keep up with Google, and they took actually that market with much better default and much better software experience and so on. I just wanted to.
But this wasn't always the case, because they did get sued for pushing their Explorer browser down people's throats. They had this power because they owned the operating system. And there was actually a major court battle around bundling. And it's possible that we see other legal action, for example, taken against Apple, which some consider to have a monopoly. People don't really realize this, but when you can set the defaults, when you have the platform that can make these choices, you have a lot of power, because you basically set the average, the standard. If nothing changes, I have to go out of my way if I don't do that, if I don't go out of my way to customize, then it's going to be your choice that's activated. And on an iPhone, I mean, Spotify is not pre-installed, but Apple Music is. And on top of that, because Apple owns the rails to the App Store, they don't need to pay the 30% tax that all other apps have to pay. So if you subscribe to Netflix or another app on the App Store, Apple gets a 30% cut, or at least like they used to, because Netflix doesn't allow this anymore. But then, like, for the years and years and years of your subscription, they still get now 15% after a year. But in-app purchases, always a cut for Apple. But for Apple Music, I mean, there's no cut.
Like, yeah, what you're saying now is because these massive companies, like in the beginning, they had the best defaults, or they own kind of the platform or the device that you're working on, and that way they have an extreme advantage and can actually create a massive monopoly, which doesn't create a very competitive market anymore. Do you think that this should be regulated? Actually, let's go a little bit political, maybe off topic, but if it doesn't that like prevent from the best product getting out there when Apple only, for example, allows Apple Music on their iPhone? But on the other hand as well, they made the iPhone, so shouldn't they be allowed to kind of decide which apps are allowed on their device?
That's a very good point. I'm not really on the side of regulation. Usually I like to have stuff run its course and have a new competitor show up. But what you said about the iPhone is, it's very important to see this as a dynamic system that evolves over time. So when the iPhone had super small market share, nobody was complaining. And Apple wants to, of course, frame it as if this is still the case. But now, like, a lot of people are relying on their iPhone, doctors, whatever. And but they still want you to see it as a console, because consoles like a Sony PlayStation or an Xbox, they take a 30% cut of games, and that's considered normal because they, again, own the platform. And the iPhone, because it's a general purpose
they need
device,
each other kind of. The console
doesn't feel like a console. Yeah. So is the iPhone a console? I mean, obviously it's way different because you can do so much more with it. But yeah, on the other hand, you're right. Apple did create the platform, so
it's kind of a difficult.
But I don't think you go straight to a monopoly. I mean, yeah, I think there's other reasons also why Apple has a monopoly, or other players have monopolies.
Yeah, it's kind of let the courts decide on in Europe or in America what they're gonna decide on these issues. Maybe to go back actually to those defaults, that software which has very good defaults makes the user immediately satisfied, uses it in the right way from the beginning. But what are some characteristics and maybe some results of good defaults versus bad defaults, with some example?
The result is always to get your user to not have to think and to move as fast as possible. And also try to design your system, like if you're making a small library in software, for example, you have these rules, make it fault tolerant. So make it easy to use, but also hard to misuse. So be forgiving on the user. For example, if they forget to, like if you have an alarm clock app, you can show them a little reminder. Or if they forget, if they're in the other room and their alarm is going off, like if after 15 minutes, I think you can stop it, like stuff like that. So
these are little defaults, I think, that still makes the experience more pleasurable. Or when they forget to fill in information, instead of like constantly annoying the customer, you need to fill in that. Just let them go straight to the process, even without, let's say, a super safe password that later on the way maybe they could also
passwords are really a key thing, and users usually don't want to think about this when signing up. Again, typing in their email twice, who wants to do that? But passwords are so crucial, and yet, as a user, usually you just want to go